stop. I am asking for your probable cause.
I know what you're trying to do! You think your title protects you? You think I won't put you in cuffs?
I am a federal judge. You are violating my rights.
The dashboard camera clicked on at 11:47 p.m., capturing the moment that would end a 23-year police career in less than 15 minutes. Officer Kyle Brennan had no idea the woman in the silver Mercedes he just pulled over was about to become his worst nightmare. She wasn't drunk, she wasn't speeding, she hadn't broken any law. But she was black, driving through an affluent neighborhood, and in Brennan's mind, that was reason enough. Judge Simone Harper had spent the evening at a charity gala for the Children's Legal Defense Fund, an event she attended every year. She'd had exactly one glass of champagne during the cocktail hour, hours ago. She was wearing an elegant navy dress, pearl earrings her mother had given her, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from 20 years on the federal bench. She was 2 miles from her home when she saw the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. Her first thought was confusion. She checked her speedometer. 32 in a 35 zone. Turn signals had been used. She hadn't drifted lanes or done anything remotely questionable. She pulled over smoothly, put the car in park, and placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Force of habit from a lifetime of knowing that black skin and traffic stops can be a deadly combination. Brennan approached the driver's side window with his flashlight already drawn, shining it directly into Simone's face before she could even lower the window. The light was blinding, intentionally aggressive. When she finally got the window down, he was already speaking in that particular tone cops use when they've decided you're guilty of something. "Step out of the vehicle. I need you to step out right now." Simone kept her voice level and professional. "Officer, can you tell me why you pulled me over?" The question seemed to irritate him. "I said step out of the vehicle. Don't make me repeat myself." This is where most people would comply. Fear does that. Authority does that. But Simone Harper wasn't most people. She'd prosecuted corrupt officials, presided over constitutional challenges, and defended civil liberties in courtrooms across the country. She knew exactly what was happening here. "I'm asking you a simple question. What is the reason for this stop?" Brennan's jaw tightened. His hand moved to his belt, hovering near his weapon in a gesture designed to intimidate. "I smell alcohol. You're swerving. I have probable cause for a DUI investigation. Now get out of the car before I remove you myself." Every word was a lie, and they both knew it. The dashboard camera would later show Simone's vehicle never swerved once. The distance between them made smelling anything impossible. There was no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion, nothing but a black woman in an expensive car and a cop who couldn't tolerate that image in his neighborhood. Simone did something extraordinary then. She started documenting everything out loud. "Officer, for the record, I have not been drinking. Beyond one glass of champagne approximately 4 hours ago. I was not speeding or swerving. I'm asking you again to state your probable cause for this stop, as is my constitutional right." The mention of constitutional rights seemed to flip a switch in Brennan. That's when he went from aggressive to dangerous. He yanked the door open before Simone could react. His hands grabbed her arm, pulling her from the vehicle with force completely disproportionate to the situation. Simone stumbled in her heels, catching herself against the car. She didn't resist. She didn't fight back. She simply continued speaking clearly. "I am not resisting. I am complying under protest. You are using excessive force for a traffic stop without stated probable cause." Brennan spun her around, pressing her against the hood of her own car. The metal was cold through her dress. He grabbed her wrists, pulling them behind her back with unnecessary roughness. The handcuffs clicked shut, tight enough to hurt. "You've got a real attitude problem, you know that? Think you're better than everyone else? Think the law doesn't apply to you?" Simone turned her head slightly, enough to make eye contact. The calm in her voice never wavered. "I'm a federal judge for the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. My name is Simone Harper. You were violating my civil rights and falsely detaining me without cause. I suggest you call your supervisor immediately." For exactly 3 seconds, Brennan froze. His face went through a sequence of emotions that the dashboard camera captured in perfect detail. Confusion first, then disbelief, Then something that looked like panic. Then anger covering the panic. Sure you are. And I'm the president. Let me guess, you're also a doctor and an astronaut? He actually laughed. Not nervous laughter, but genuine mockery. He'd decided this was some kind of con, a sophisticated lie from someone trying to talk their way out of a DUI. In his mind, federal judges didn't look like the woman handcuffed against this Mercedes. Federal judges certainly didn't drive through his neighborhood at midnight. What Brennan didn't know was that Simone Harper had been appointed to the federal bench by a unanimous Senate confirmation. She'd argued cases before the Supreme Court. She'd written landmark opinions on Fourth Amendment rights that were taught in every law school in the country. She literally wrote the legal precedent on unlawful stops and searches. Check my credentials. They're in my purse. My identification is in my wallet. My judicial ID is in the front pocket. 5 minutes of verification will confirm everything I'm telling you. Brennan pulled her away from the car instead, walking her toward his patrol vehicle. I'll check whatever I want after we do the field sobriety test. You're going to blow into a breathalyzer, and we'll see how federal you really are. The sarcasm dripped from every word. He genuinely believed he was dealing with an imposter, someone using a fake title to intimidate him. The alternative, that he'd just assaulted a sitting federal judge without cause, was too catastrophic for his mind to accept. Simone stood under the streetlight, hands cuffed behind her back, and made a decision. She stopped talking. Not because she was afraid, but because she understood something Brennan didn't. Every second of this encounter was being recorded. Every illegal action, every rights violation, every false statement was being preserved in digital clarity. Words wouldn't save her now. The evidence would. Brennan retrieved his breathalyzer from the patrol car, the cheap roadside version that defense attorneys love to challenge in court. He held it up like a trophy, smirking as he approached. Open your mouth. Let's see what the federal judge blows. Simone complied. She breathed into the device steadily, maintaining eye contact the entire time. The machine beeped. Brennan looked at the display. His smirk disappeared. 0.00. Completely sober. Not even a trace of alcohol in her system. The champagne from 4 hours ago had metabolized completely. Brennan stared at the device like it had betrayed him, then made it worse. Machine must be broken. We'll do a blood test at the station. That's when Simone spoke again, and her voice carried weight that made even Brennan hesitate. Officer Brennan, your name is on your badge. This dashboard camera has recorded everything from the moment you pulled me over without cause. The breathalyzer shows I'm completely sober. You have no probable cause, no evidence of impairment, and no legal justification for this stop or detention. You are now compounding your violations by refusing to release me despite exculpatory evidence. I'm giving you one final opportunity to end this before it destroys your career. The words hung in the night air. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car drove past, the driver slowing to look at the scene. Brennan's radio crackled with dispatcher traffic about a domestic disturbance 3 blocks away. He should have released her right then. Any reasonable officer would have recognized the situation was spiraling beyond control. But Brennan had gone too far to back down now. Pride, ego, and something uglier kept him committed to the path he'd chosen. Get in the car. You're going to the station for a blood draw and booking for DUI and resisting arrest. Simone didn't argue anymore. She let him put her in the back seat of the patrol car, the plastic seat cold and uncomfortable. She sat perfectly still as he drove, watching the streets pass by, already thinking 3 steps ahead. What Brennan didn't realize during that 12-minute drive was that Simone's phone, still in her purse in her Mercedes, had been on a call the entire time. She'd activated the voice dial feature when she first saw the lights, calling her clerk's emergency line. Every word of the encounter had been transmitted and recorded on a separate device beyond Brennan's control. The station was quiet when they arrived, just after midnight. A few officers milling around, paperwork being filed, the usual late-shift routine. Brennan walked Simone inside like he'd just caught a major criminal, chest puffed out, confident in his actions. The desk sergeant looked up from his computer, saw the woman in the elegant dress and handcuffs, and something in his expression shifted. The sergeant's nameplate read Kowalski, and his eyes moved from Simone's face to her designer dress, then to Brennan with a question forming on his lips. What's the charge? DUI and resisting arrest. She refused field sobriety tests and was uncooperative throughout the stop. Kowalski's eyebrows went up. The breathalyzer? 0.0. Machine's defective. I'm requesting a blood draw. Something in that exchange made Kowalski stand up from his chair. He walked around the desk, moving slowly, studying Simone with the kind of attention that comes from years of experience, recognizing when something doesn't add up. Ma'am, what's your name? Judge Simone Harper. I serve in the Federal District Court, Southern Division. I was pulled over without cause approximately 30 minutes ago while driving home from a colleague's retirement dinner. I submitted to a breathalyzer, which confirmed I'm completely sober. Officer Brennan has refused to release me despite having zero evidence of any violation. The station went quiet. Every officer within earshot stopped what they were doing. Pens froze mid-signature. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone dropped a coffee cup, the ceramic shattering against the tile floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Kowalski's face went pale. He looked at Brennan like someone had just told him his partner had brought a live grenade into the building. You arrested a federal judge? She's lying. Probably stolen the identification. Criminals do it all the time. But Kowalski was already moving to the computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. He pulled up the federal court website, navigated to the judges section, and there she was. Photograph, biography, appointment history. Appointed by the president 3 years ago. Previously served as assistant U.S. attorney for 8 years. Harvard Law, top of her class. Recipient of numerous legal awards and commendations. Kowalski turned his monitor so Brennan could see it. That's her. Brennan stared at the screen. For the first time since the traffic stop, genuine fear flickered across his face. But it lasted only a moment before the defiance returned. Doesn't matter who she is, she still broke the law. What law? Kowalski's voice had an edge now. What did she do? She was swerving, driving erratically. Your dash cam will show that? Brennan hesitated. It should. It should? Or it does? Kowalski was already pulling up the patrol car footage. The system was networked, automatically uploading video to the department's servers. He found Brennan's car, located the timestamp, and pressed play. Everyone in the station gathered around. They watched Simone's Mercedes maintaining perfect lane discipline. They watched it signal properly before changing lanes. They watched it stop completely at a stop sign, wait the appropriate time, then proceed. They watched Brennan's patrol car follow for 8 blocks without the Mercedes doing anything remotely resembling erratic driving. Then they watched Brennan hit his lights. Kowalski stopped the video. He looked at Brennan with an expression that combined disbelief and fury. Where's the swerving? It was before I started recording. Your camera activates automatically when you leave the parking lot. We both know that. The system has glitches. Convenient. Kowalski turned to another officer. Get Lieutenant Vasquez down here right now. While they waited, Kowalski removed Simone's handcuffs himself, apologizing with every word. The other officers kept their distance, none of them wanting any connection to what was unfolding. They'd all seen careers end before, but this had the potential to be spectacularly destructive. Lieutenant Carmen Vasquez arrived within minutes, her uniform hastily straightened, clearly having been woken from sleep. She listened to Kowalski's summary, watched the dashcam footage, and her jaw tightened with each passing second. When the video ended, she turned to Brennan with barely controlled rage. My office. Now. What happened in that office over the next 40 minutes would become the subject of internal affairs reports, legal depositions, and eventually federal court testimony. Brennan tried to justify his actions. He claimed he'd made an honest mistake, that the judge had been suspicious, that her refusal to comply had given him no choice. Vasquez tore apart every excuse with surgical precision. You had no probable cause for the stop. Your own camera proves that. You conducted field sobriety tests on someone who clearly wasn't impaired. You arrested a federal judge after a breathalyzer confirmed she was sober. You falsified the reason for the stop. You ignored exculpatory evidence. You made false statements to your desk sergeant. Every sentence was a nail in Brennan's career coffin. Meanwhile, Simone sat in the station waiting area, declining offers of coffee or water, simply sitting with perfect posture while officers avoided eye contact. One younger officer, barely out of the academy, approached nervously. "Ma'am, I just want to say I'm sorry this happened. That shouldn't have happened to anyone, especially not to you." Simone's expression softened slightly. "What's your name, officer?" "Taylor, ma'am. Officer Melissa Taylor. How long have you been on the force, Officer Taylor?" 6 months. "Let me give you some advice that will serve you well. When you see something wrong, don't participate in it. Don't enable it. Don't look away from it. What happened tonight didn't start with the traffic stop. It started with years of similar stops that nobody questioned, nobody reported, nobody challenged. Be better than that." Taylor nodded, the lesson sinking in, before retreating to her desk. When Vasquez finally emerged from her office, Brennan followed behind her, his badge and weapon already surrendered. She walked directly to Simone. "Judge Harper, Officer Brennan has been suspended pending a full internal affairs investigation. The department will be conducting a comprehensive review of his arrest record and body camera footage. We will cooperate fully with any legal action you choose to pursue. On behalf of the department, I apologize for this egregious violation of your rights." Simone stood, gathering her composure. "Lieutenant, I want copies of all documentation related to tonight's incident. The dashcam footage, the breathalyzer results, the arrest report, booking photos, everything. I also want a list of every traffic stop Officer Brennan has conducted in the past 3 years, with particular attention to demographic data." Vasquez didn't hesitate. "You'll have everything by end of business tomorrow. And Lieutenant, I want to know how many complaints have been filed against Officer Brennan and how they were resolved." The question hung in the air because everyone in that station already knew the answer. Multiple complaints had been filed over the years, all dismissed, all marked as unfounded or unsubstantiated. The pattern had been there all along, visible to anyone who cared to look. Nobody had looked. A patrol car drove Simone back to her Mercedes, still sitting on that dark street corner where this nightmare began. Her phone showed 43 missed calls. The recording of the entire encounter was saved and backed up. She sat in her car for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, processing everything that had happened. Tomorrow, she would file formal complaints with the police department, the state attorney general, and the FBI's Civil Rights Division. She would document every detail while it remained fresh. She would use her position and her knowledge of the system to ensure this wasn't buried or dismissed. But tonight, she just wanted to go home. The drive took 15 minutes. Her house was dark and quiet. She walked inside, kicked off her heels, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had occurred. The violation, the humiliation, the rage. But mostly, she thought about all the people this had happened to who weren't federal judges, who didn't know their rights, who didn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back, who ended up with criminal records, lost jobs, damaged lives. All because of officers like Brennan, who saw certain people as inherently suspicious, inherently criminal. The next morning started early. Simone's phone rang at 6:30, with her clerk calling to confirm she'd heard the recording and asking what needed to be done. By 7, Simone was composing a formal complaint. By 8, she was on a conference call with the FBI's Civil Rights Division. By 9, the story had leaked to the press. Local news picked it up first. Federal judge arrested in questionable DUI stop. Then regional outlets. Then national. By noon, footage that didn't come from the police dashcam began circulating online. A resident whose house faced that intersection had a security camera that captured the entire traffic stop. The video showed everything. Simone's calm compliance, Brennan's aggressive escalation, the lack of any impairment. The footage went viral within hours, viewed millions of times. Public reaction was swift and fierce. The police chief held a press conference that same afternoon. He stood behind a podium bearing the department's seal, looking visibly uncomfortable as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Chief Raymond spoke in carefully measured tones about how they took these allegations seriously and had immediately placed Officer Brennan on administrative leave pending a full investigation. He emphasized their commitment to professional standards and community trust. The words rang hollow to anyone who'd watched the security footage. Standing in her chambers the next morning, Simone reviewed the documents that had been delivered as promised. The file on Officer Brennan was thicker than she'd anticipated. 17 complaints over 5 years. 17. Each one dismissed with variations of the same justification. Complainant uncooperative. Insufficient evidence. Officer acted within policy guidelines. She spread the reports across her desk, studying the pattern that emerged. 12 of the 17 complainants were people of color. 14 were stopped for minor traffic violations that escalated dramatically. 8 mentioned being called aggressive or threatening despite remaining calm. The pattern wasn't subtle. It was a neon sign that everyone had ignored. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Judge Reeves, you don't know me, but Officer Brennan arrested me 2 years ago. Same thing happened to me. DUI charge. Failed sobriety test I never actually failed. Night in jail. I couldn't afford a good lawyer. Took a plea deal because I was terrified. Lost my job anyway. Thank you for fighting back. More messages followed throughout the day. Different numbers, similar stories. A teacher who spent 12 hours in custody. A nurse who missed her shift and got written up. A college student whose scholarship was jeopardized by an arrest record. A father who couldn't pick up his kids from school because he was being processed on bogus charges. Each story a variation on the same theme. Brennan saw what he wanted to see, manufactured evidence to support his assumptions, and the system protected him every single time. The FBI investigation moved faster than typical federal inquiries. Special Agent Victoria Lynn arrived at Simone's office 3 days after the incident, carrying a briefcase and a recorder. She was direct and thorough, spending 4 hours going through every detail of that night. What were you wearing? What time did the stop occur? Describe his exact words. How long between the field sobriety test and the breathalyzer? Did he give you the opportunity to request a blood test? Simone answered everything precisely, her legal training making her an exceptionally credible witness. She also handed over something the agent hadn't expected, a flash drive containing audio recordings from 6 other individuals who'd contacted her with similar experiences involving Brennan. All had agreed to speak with federal investigators. All wanted their stories on record. Agent Lynn's expression shifted as she reviewed the files. This isn't just one bad stop. This is systemic. We're looking at civil rights violations, false arrest, possible evidence tampering? If even half of these accounts are accurate, Officer Brennan has been operating with impunity for years. Simone leaned forward. The question isn't whether the accounts are accurate. The question is, how many complaints have to be filed before someone actually investigates? 17 complaints, Agent Lynn. 17 times someone said this officer violated their rights, and 17 times the department found nothing wrong. That's not oversight failure. That's intentional blindness. The local news cycle exploded. Investigative reporters started digging into Brennan's record, finding the same pattern Simone had identified. They interviewed people who'd been too afraid to come forward before. Citizens who thought no one would believe them against a police officer's word. A restaurant manager described being pulled over while driving home from closing. A graphic designer talked about being stopped 3 times in 6 months. Always released without charges, but always treated like a criminal. A high school counselor recounted an incident where Brennan searched her car for 30 minutes, convinced he'd find drugs. finding nothing but becoming angry when she asked for his badge number. The police union issued a statement defending Brennan. Officer Brennan has served this community with distinction for over a decade. These allegations are part of a coordinated attack on law enforcement. We stand behind our officer and trust the investigation will clear his name. He has the right to due process, just like any citizen. The statement was technically correct about due process, but missed the irony entirely. Brennan had denied that same due process to countless people over the years, assuming guilt and manufacturing grounds for arrest. Public pressure mounted. Community groups organized protests outside the police station. The local NAACP chapter called for Brennan's termination and a comprehensive review of the department's internal affairs procedures. City council members who'd previously stayed silent suddenly had strong opinions about accountability and reform. The mayor, facing re-election in 8 months, announced the formation of a civilian review board to examine police conduct. Simone knew political theater when she saw it, but she also understood that public attention created opportunities for actual change. 2 weeks after her arrest, the district attorney's office made an announcement. All charges against Judge Simone Reeves were being dropped with prejudice, meaning they could never be refiled. Additionally, the DA was launching a review of every case where Officer Brennan had been the arresting officer in the past 5 years. If evidence of misconduct was found, those cases would be eligible for review and potential dismissal. The decision affected hundreds of cases. Public defenders who'd watched their clients plead guilty to charges they swore were fabricated suddenly had grounds to reopen those matters. People with criminal records stemming from Brennan's arrests could petition for expungement. The ripple effects would take years to fully process. Officer Brennan's attorney released his own statement. My client maintains his innocence and looks forward to his day in court. He followed proper procedure during a routine traffic stop. The accusations against him are unfounded and motivated by anti-police sentiment. He's being made a scapegoat for larger societal issues he had no part in creating. But the evidence kept mounting. The FBI discovered that Brennan had filed reports claiming drug dogs alerted on vehicles when no canine unit had been present. He documented field sobriety tests showing impairment in cases where dashcam footage showed suspects performing flawlessly. He'd claimed suspects were aggressive or threatening in situations where video showed calm compliance. The lies weren't occasional mistakes. They were standard practice. 3 weeks in, a breaking development shifted everything. A former officer from the same precinct came forward as a whistleblower. His name was Thomas Garrett, recently retired after 28 years on the force. He contacted Agent Lynn directly and provided testimony that Brennan wasn't acting alone. According to Garrett, a group of officers had an informal competition, tracking who could make the most arrests each month. They called it the stat game. Promotions and preferred assignments went to officers with high numbers, creating incentive to manufacture arrests from routine stops. Garrett had complained to supervisors multiple times over the years. Each time, he was told to focus on his own work and stop causing problems. When he persisted, he was reassigned to less desirable shifts and passed over for advancement. He eventually stopped complaining and started counting days until retirement. Now, with pension secured and nothing left to lose, he was ready to testify about everything he'd witnessed. His testimony was devastating. He described watching Brennan and 3 other officers coordinate stories after questionable stops. He recalled supervisors coaching officers on how to write reports that would withstand scrutiny, teaching them which phrases justified searches and arrests. He provided names, dates, specific incidents. The FBI investigation expanded immediately, now targeting multiple officers and several supervisors. The department's command structure was implicated in what appeared to be institutional tolerance of civil rights violations. This wasn't a few bad apples. This was a corrupted barrel. Simone received a call from the police chief requesting a private meeting. She agreed, curious what he could possibly say at this point. They met in a neutral location, a conference room at the courthouse. Chief Raymond looked exhausted, his face drawn and eyes shadowed. "Judge Reeves, I want to apologize personally, not as chief, but as someone who failed in his responsibility to ensure his officers operated with integrity. I should have seen this. The signs were there." Simone's expression remained neutral. "Chief Raymond, with respect, you did see this. 17 complaints against one officer, multiple complaints against others, former officers trying to report misconduct. You didn't fail to see it. You chose to ignore it because addressing it would have been difficult and uncomfortable." "There's a difference." He nodded slowly, accepting the rebuke. "You're right, and I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm here to tell you that I'm implementing immediate changes. Mandatory body cameras for all officers, activated during every citizen interaction. Independent review of all use of force incidents. Revised training protocols emphasizing de-escalation. A genuine civilian oversight board with subpoena power. These changes should have happened years ago, but they're happening now." Simone studied him carefully. "Those are good steps, Chief. But policies mean nothing without enforcement and accountability. The real question is whether officers who violate those policies will face actual consequences, or whether the system will continue protecting them." The chief had no answer to that, because they both knew the answer depended on factors beyond his control. Culture, politics, union contracts, qualified immunity, the blue wall of silence. Changing policy was easy. Changing culture was the hard part. Officer Brennan's trial began 6 months after his arrest. The courtroom was packed with media, activists, community members, and off-duty officers showing support for their colleague. Simone sat in the gallery, watching quietly as prosecutors presented their case. The evidence was overwhelming. Body camera footage showed Brennan planting drugs during traffic stops on 3 separate occasions. Dashboard camera footage from his patrol car captured him coaching his partner on how to justify searches that had no legal basis. Text messages revealed conversations about quotas and the stat game that former Officer Garrett had described. But the most damaging testimony came from victims. 7 people took the stand to describe their encounters with Brennan. A college student arrested for possession after Brennan planted a baggie during a routine speeding stop. A single mother who lost custody of her children after a fabricated drug arrest led to child services involvement. A man who spent 14 months in jail awaiting trial for charges that were eventually dismissed when surveillance footage contradicted Brennan's reports. Each testimony painted the same picture: an officer who viewed citizens, particularly citizens of color, as targets rather than people deserving protection. Someone who manufactured crimes to boost his statistics, advance his career, and satisfy supervisors demanding results. The defense strategy was predictable. They attacked the credibility of witnesses, suggested video evidence was taken out of context, and portrayed Brennan as a dedicated officer who made difficult, split-second decisions in dangerous situations. They brought character witnesses, fellow officers who testified about Brennan's professionalism and dedication. But the jury wasn't buying it. After just 9 hours of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts: conspiracy to violate civil rights, falsification of evidence, perjury, deprivation of rights under color of law. Brennan showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. His wife sobbed quietly in the front row. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Federal guidelines suggested 12 to 15 years. The prosecution asked for the maximum, arguing that Brennan had betrayed his oath and destroyed lives for personal advancement. The defense begged for leniency, highlighting his years of service and previously clean record. The judge, a woman named Elena Vasquez, who had spent 20 years on the federal bench, delivered a scathing statement before announcing the sentence. "Officer Brennan, you were entrusted with extraordinary power. The power to detain, to search, to arrest, to use force. That power exists because society trusts that officers will exercise it responsibly and lawfully. You violated that trust repeatedly and deliberately. You manufactured evidence, lied under oath, and destroyed lives to advance your career. The harm you caused is immeasurable. Families separated, reputations destroyed, years of freedom stolen. And for what? Better performance reviews? Preferred assignments? Your actions didn't just harm your victims. They harmed every honest officer who does this job with integrity. They harmed community trust in law enforcement. They harmed the justice system itself. Judge Vasquez sentenced Brennan to 18 years in federal prison, 3 years above the guideline maximum. The courtroom erupted. Officers in attendance stood and walked out in protest. Community members applauded until Vasquez gavelled them into silence. Brennan's wife collapsed into her attorney's arms. But Brennan wasn't the only one facing consequences. The 3 other officers implicated in the stat game were indicted on similar charges. 2 took plea deals, agreeing to testify against supervisors in exchange for reduced sentences. The 3rd chose to fight and lost, receiving a 14-year sentence after trial. 4 supervisors were also charged. They faced counts of conspiracy and obstruction for their roles in encouraging and covering up misconduct. The trials revealed a systematic effort to boost arrest numbers regardless of legality. Supervisors had created informal reward systems, offering preferred shifts and overtime opportunities to officers with high statistics. They had coached officers on report writing, teaching them phrases that would justify legally questionable stops and searches. During one supervisor's trial, prosecutors presented an internal training document titled Effective Report Writing for Court Viability. The document explicitly instructed officers to use specific language in reports to overcome legal challenges. It suggested phrases like furtive movements and appeared nervous that could justify searches. It advised officers to always include statements about detecting odors of marijuana or observing suspicious bulges that might indicate weapons. The document was devastating evidence of institutional corruption. It proved supervisors weren't just tolerating misconduct, they were actively training officers to circumvent constitutional protections. All 4 supervisors were convicted. Sentences ranged from 8 to 12 years. The police chief who had met with Simone announced his resignation the day after the final verdict, though he faced no criminal charges. His resignation letter contained no apology, just vague statements about allowing new leadership to guide the department forward. The civil cases moved forward simultaneously. Simone's lawsuit expanded into a class action representing 43 people who had been arrested by Brennan and the other implicated officers. The city fought initially, denying systemic problems and claiming the convicted officers were anomalies. But discovery revealed otherwise. Internal affairs records showed hundreds of complaints over a 10-year period that were dismissed or inadequately investigated. Performance evaluations explicitly rewarded officers for high arrest numbers, without any quality control to ensure those arrests were legitimate. Training materials emphasized enforcement over community relations. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the city agreed to settle. The total payout exceeded $30 million, distributed among class members based on the severity of harm they'd suffered. People who had been arrested but not charged received smaller amounts. Those who had been charged received more. People who had served jail time or lost jobs and housing received the largest settlements. Simone's portion was substantial, though she donated most of it to organizations working on criminal justice reform. Money couldn't undo what happened, couldn't restore the 2 years of her life spent fighting charges that should never have existed. But it could fund work to prevent others from experiencing the same nightmare. The consent decree imposed on the department was comprehensive. Mandatory body cameras with severe penalties for officers who fail to activate them. Independent investigation of all use of force incidents. Revised training emphasizing constitutional rights and de-escalation. A civilian oversight board with genuine authority to investigate complaints and recommend discipline. Annual audits of arrest patterns to identify potential racial bias. Implementation was rocky. The police union challenged several provisions, arguing they interfered with officer safety and operational flexibility. Some officers left the department rather than work under new restrictions. Others continued operating as they always had, betting that enforcement of new policies would be inconsistent. But slowly, measurably, things began to change. Complaints decreased, use of force incidents dropped, community surveys showed incremental improvement in trust. It wasn't transformation, but it was movement in the right direction. Simone returned to her life, though fundamentally altered. She changed careers, leaving corporate work to attend law school. She graduated 3 years later and joined a nonprofit legal organization representing people in situations similar to hers. She became an expert on police misconduct litigation and testified before legislative committees about needed reforms. She never forgot what happened in that parking lot. The feeling of handcuffs, the humiliation of being arrested in front of neighbors, the terror of facing prison for something she didn't do. Those memories fueled her work, driving her to fight for others who lacked resources or knowledge to fight for themselves. 8 years after her arrest, Simone received an unexpected letter. It was from Brennan, writing from federal prison. The letter was brief. He didn't apologize. He didn't claim innocence. He simply stated that he'd had time to think about his actions and the people he'd harmed. He said he understood why she couldn't forgive him. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He just wanted her to know that he thought about what he'd done, and he was sorry. Simone read the letter twice, then filed it away. She didn't respond. Some wounds don't heal with apologies, especially ones that come after consequence rather than conscience. Brennan's regret, if genuine, was his to carry. What mattered more was ensuring the system that enabled him was dismantled, that future officers understood the badge wasn't a license for abuse, that communities had mechanisms to hold police accountable, that people like her, standing in parking lots minding their own business, didn't become casualties of someone else's ambition. The fight wasn't over. Systems don't change because of one lawsuit or one trial. But every verdict, every settlement, every policy reform added weight to the scale. Justice wasn't a destination. It was constant pressure applied in the right direction. Simone thought about that night often, the feeling of cold metal against her wrists, the humiliation of standing handcuffed while neighbors watched, the calculated cruelty in Brennan's voice when he mocked her credentials. Those memories never fully faded, but they transformed into something else. Fuel. She used them every time she walked into a courtroom representing someone who'd been railroaded by officers who thought badges made them untouchable. Every time she testified before legislators about qualified immunity and accountability. Every time she trained young lawyers on civil rights litigation. The night that nearly destroyed her life became the foundation for work that would protect thousands of others. The system that enabled Brennan didn't disappear overnight. Culture change moves slower than policy change. But the consent decree forced into place after the trials created cracks in the wall. Body cameras became mandatory. Civilian oversight gained real teeth. Officers started understanding that their actions had consequences beyond internal review boards designed to protect them. Years later, walking through that same neighborhood where everything happened, Simone would sometimes drive past the intersection where Brennan pulled her over. The street looked exactly the same. Same houses, same streetlights, same stop sign. But everything had changed beneath the surface. The department operated differently. Officers thought twice before manufacturing probable cause. Communities had mechanisms to fight back. Perfect? No. Better? Measurably. That's what justice looks like in the real world. Not dramatic courtroom moments or tearful apologies, just incremental pressure applied consistently over time until the corrupt foundation cracks and something stronger gets built in its place. Brennan sat in a federal prison cell thinking about what he'd lost. The officers who followed his example faced their own consequences. The supervisors who enabled them learned that looking away had a price. And Simone Harper, the woman who refused to be silent in that parking lot, became the architect of reforms that would outlast everyone involved. Because the real victory wasn't one verdict or one settlement. It was changing the calculation, making officers understand that the next person they harass might be someone who fights back, someone who knows their rights, someone who has the resources and knowledge to burn their career to the ground. That fear, that uncertainty, that accountability creates the space where actual justice becomes possible. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, a lot of you have told me you're waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and just lying there. Can't shut your mind off. And the next day, you're dragging through everything. I came across a simple 21-day sleep guide that's helped thousands of people fix exactly that. No pills, no apps, no gadgets. Just a step-by-step plan that actually works. It's only $15. I put the link in the description if you want to check it out. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.
You don't think your damn military medals make you better than me. You sit there thinking you're untouchable because you're black and got a fancy uniform.
Everything legally required, sir. Every document's valid. Every command follows.
You're abusing authority because of who I am, not what I am.
The sheriff's hand moved to his weapon before the Navy SEAL could even finish his sentence. One moment, Lieutenant Commander James Rees was explaining why his temporary registration was perfectly legal. The next, he was staring down the barrel of department-issued authority backed by nothing but assumption and ego. What happened in the following 11 minutes would cost Brazos County more than their entire annual budget and end a 23-year law enforcement career in disgrace. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to someone like James. Not on a random Tuesday afternoon on State Highway 21. James had been driving back from visiting his mother in Houston. She'd just turned 70, and he'd spent the weekend helping her reorganize the garage, fix a leaking faucet, and listen to stories about his late father. Standard son duties. He was tired but content, looking forward to getting back to base in San Diego. His truck was new, purchased just 2 weeks earlier from a dealership in Virginia near his previous duty station. The temporary tags were clearly visible in the rear window, valid for another 45 days. Sheriff Clayton Briggs saw something else entirely. Briggs had been with the department since he was 21 years old, worked his way up from deputy to sheriff through what he called old-fashioned police work. Others might call it something different. His record showed a pattern of stops concentrated in specific neighborhoods, targeting specific demographics. 17 formal complaints over 2 decades, all dismissed or marked as unfounded. The system had protected him perfectly until the moment he decided to pull over the wrong person on the wrong day with a dashcam recording every second. The initial stop seemed routine enough. Briggs activated his lights and James pulled over immediately, hands visible on the steering wheel before the sheriff even approached. Textbook compliance. James had been through this before, more times than he cared to count. He knew the script by heart. But Briggs wasn't following any script. The sheriff approached the driver's side window with his hand already resting on his holster. Not hovering near it, actually resting on it, fingers drumming against the leather. James noticed immediately. His training kicked in, the same heightened awareness that had kept him alive during 3 combat deployments in hostile territories. This wasn't standard procedure. This was a man looking for confrontation. License and registration. The words came out flat. No courtesy, no explanation for the stop. James handed over his military ID along with his driver's license. He explained about the temporary registration, pointed to the clearly visible documentation in the rear window. He kept his voice calm, professional, exactly how the Navy had trained him to handle tense situations. Diffuse, don't escalate. Provide information, maintain respect, follow protocol. Briggs barely glanced at the military ID before handing it back. He focused entirely on the temporary registration paperwork, studying it like it was written in code. James watched the sheriff's expression shift from scrutiny to something else. Not confusion, determination. The look of someone who'd already decided how this would end and was now just finding justification. The temporary tag looked suspicious. Briggs' voice had changed, harder now, accusatory. James felt his stomach tighten. Suspicious how? The paperwork was legitimate, issued by a licensed Virginia dealership, completely legal under federal interstate commerce regulations. Thousands of people drove through Texas every day with similar documentation. That's when Briggs asked James to step out of the vehicle. No reasonable officer makes that request during a routine traffic stop for a documentation check. James knew it. Briggs knew it. But Briggs had a badge and a gun and 23 years of getting away with exactly this kind of behavior. James had military training, combat experience, and the knowledge that one wrong move could end with him bleeding out on Texas asphalt while his mother wondered why he never made it home. He stepped out of the truck. The dash cam captured everything in crystalline detail. James, standing with his hands clearly visible, speaking in measured tones, explaining his military service, his recent purchase of the vehicle, the complete legitimacy of his documentation. Briggs, circling like a predator, finding fault with everything. The way James was standing, the tone of his voice, the fact that he was asking questions about why this stop was necessary. "You're being uncooperative." Briggs said it loud enough for the dash cam to catch every syllable. The accusation was absurd on its face. James had complied with every single request, provided every document asked for, maintained perfect composure despite increasingly hostile treatment. But Briggs needed James to be uncooperative, needed him to be a threat, because what came next required justification. Briggs called for backup. Within 6 minutes, 2 additional patrol units arrived. Neither deputy had any idea what they were responding to. Dispatch had reported a suspicious vehicle stop with an uncooperative driver. They pulled up expecting potential danger, and instead found a Navy SEAL standing next to his truck with perfect military posture, speaking respectfully to their sheriff, surrounded by documentation proving he'd done nothing wrong. Deputy Angela Martinez arrived first. 15-year veteran, solid record, no complaints. She immediately sensed something wasn't right about this situation. The second deputy, rookie officer named Kyle Chen, was too new to question anything. He just took position where Briggs directed him. James watched 3 officers position themselves around him like he'd committed murder instead of driving while black in a new truck. The absurdity would have been funny if it wasn't so dangerous. He'd faced enemy combatants in Fallujah with less firepower pointed in his direction. Martinez asked Briggs what was going on. The sheriff's explanation made no sense even to her. Suspicious temporary registration, uncooperative driver, possible stolen vehicle. Each claim more ridiculous than the last, contradicted by the physical evidence sitting right there in James's hands. But here's what Martinez understood that Chen didn't yet. Challenging your sheriff on scene in front of a civilian wasn't how you kept your job in Brazos County. You might have questions, you might know something isn't right, but you swallow it, follow orders, and maybe bring it up later through proper channels. That's how the system works. That's how bad cops keep operating for decades. She took position and said nothing. Briggs demanded James submit to a vehicle search. James asked on what grounds, since he'd committed no crime, and the stop itself lacked reasonable suspicion. That question, that completely legal and reasonable question, was apparently the final straw. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Briggs's voice had gone cold. The dash cam captured James's expression in that moment. Not fear, not anger. Something worse. Resignation. The look of a man who'd served his country with distinction, earned medals for valor, saved lives under enemy fire, and was now being handcuffed on a Texas highway for asking a question. The metal cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Standard police handcuffs, same kind used on actual criminals. They were too tight. James didn't complain. He'd been through worse in SEER school. Martinez watched this happen and felt her stomach turn. She'd seen questionable stops before. She'd witnessed Briggs push boundaries. But this was different. This was a clear violation happening right in front of her, recorded for posterity, and she was part of it now, whether she wanted to be or not. Chen, young and eager, genuinely believed they'd just arrested someone dangerous. That's what Briggs had told them. That's what the sheriff's 23 years of experience suggested. Why would he lie? James stood there, handcuffed, breathing steadily, maintaining his composure through sheer force of will. His mind was already working through what would happen next. The arrest report Briggs would file, the charges that would be fabricated, the system that would initially believe a sheriff over a black man, even one in uniform. But James had something most victims of wrongful arrest don't have: resources, knowledge, connections, and most importantly, irrefutable video evidence of every single second.
What Sheriff Clayton Briggs didn't realize as he walked James toward his patrol car, what he wouldn't understand until lawyers started filing paperwork, was that he just made the most expensive mistake of his life. The patrol car's back seat was designed for criminals, hard plastic molded to be just uncomfortable enough, no handles on the inside of the doors, a metal grate separating front from back. James sat perfectly still, his hands cuffed behind him, watching the Texas landscape roll past through the window. Briggs was on the radio. James could hear fragments through the grate. Subject in custody, resisting lawful commands, possible stolen vehicle investigation ongoing. Each word another lie being broadcast into the official record. Each phrase another brick in a wall of false narrative that would need to be torn down piece by piece. They pulled into the county detention center 20 minutes later. The building squatted low and gray against the afternoon sun. Briggs parked in the secure bay where suspects were processed away from public view. He opened the back door and hauled James out by his arm. The grip was unnecessarily rough. Performative force for the cameras mounted above the entrance. Inside, the booking area smelled like industrial cleaner and stale coffee. A deputy named Rodriguez sat behind bulletproof glass, processing paperwork from an earlier arrest. He looked up when Briggs walked in with James and his expression flickered. Just for a second. Surprise, maybe. Confusion. But he caught himself and went back to neutral. Briggs started rattling off charges. Resisting arrest. Failure to comply with lawful orders. Obstruction of an investigation. Rodriguez typed them into the system, his fingers moving across the keyboard in practiced rhythm. James said nothing. He'd already requested an attorney. Anything he said now would only be used against him. The booking process took 40 minutes. Fingerprints, photographs, personal property inventory. James's wallet containing his military ID, his driver's license, 3 credit cards, and $87 cash. His phone, his keys, his watch, a Tag Heuer his unit had chipped in to buy him when he made captain. Everything cataloged and sealed in a manila envelope. Rodriguez held up the military ID. Active duty? Briggs snatched it from his hand. Doesn't matter. Process him. But Rodriguez had already seen it. The ID was current. The rank was legitimate. This wasn't some kid fresh out of basic. This was a captain in the United States Army sitting in handcuffs because he'd asked questions during a traffic stop. Rodriguez didn't say anything else, but James saw him glance at the wall clock and make a note on a separate piece of paper. The timestamp. Something felt wrong to him, and he was creating his own record. James was moved to a holding cell. Concrete walls, metal bench, a toilet in the corner with no privacy. One other person occupied the space, a middle-aged man sleeping off whatever substance had landed him there. The cell door clanged shut with the particular finality that only steel on steel can produce. This was the part where most people panic, where the reality of arrest, of being caged, of having zero control crashes down. James had been trained for this, not specifically for wrongful arrest by corrupt small-town sheriffs, but for captivity in general. He knew how to manage his mind in confined spaces. He sat on the metal bench, closed his eyes, and started running through everything that had happened in chronological order. Every word, every action, building the mental framework he'd need when lawyers started asking questions. 3 hours passed. The man on the opposite bench woke up, mumbled something incoherent, and passed out again. James remained still, patient. The door finally opened, and a different deputy appeared, taller,
older, with gray at his temples.
His nameplate read Foster. "You've got a phone call." James stood and followed him down a corridor to a room with a single phone mounted on the wall. Foster removed the handcuffs. "Call's private. Take your time." The door closed. James picked up the receiver and dialed his attorney, a man named Vincent Shore, who handled legal affairs for several officers at Fort Hood. The phone rang twice before Shore answered. "James? I got a very interesting call from Brazos County about 30 minutes ago." "Tell me what happened." James laid it out, factual, chronological, no emotion, just the sequence of events from the moment he saw the lights in his mirror to sitting in this room. Shore listened without interrupting. James could hear him typing notes on the other end. When James finished, there was a pause. Then Shore spoke, and his voice had changed, had an edge to it now. "James, I need you to understand something. What you're describing isn't just a bad stop. This is a civil rights violation. This is deprivation of rights under color of law. This is going to be federal." "I know. Do you? Because I don't think you understand how big this is about to get. This sheriff just arrested an active-duty military officer, on camera, with zero probable cause, and then filed false charges. Do you know what the DOJ does to cases like this?" James didn't answer. He was starting to understand. Shore continued, "I'm filing emergency motions tonight. You'll be out in a few hours. But James, this doesn't end with you walking out of that cell. This goes much further. I need you to document everything while it's fresh. Every detail. Every word he said. I'm also calling Fort Hood's legal office. Your command needs to know one of their officers is sitting in county lockup on bogus charges." The call ended. James hung up and Foster reappeared to escort him back to the cell. But something had shifted in Foster's demeanor. The way he walked. The way he held himself. Less like a corrections officer and more like someone trying to distance himself from whatever was about to happen. "You need anything? Water?" "I'm fine." Foster nodded and locked the cell door again, but his expression suggested he knew exactly how not fine this situation actually was. James sat back down on the metal bench. The other occupant was awake now, staring at the ceiling. He glanced over at James. "What'd they get you for?" James considered not answering, but something about the mundane normalcy of the question made him respond. "Traffic stop." The man laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the concrete. "Yeah, they're good at that around here. Real good at finding reasons." Outside the cell, beyond the walls and the locked doors, Shore was already in motion. He'd pulled the dashcam footage through an emergency discovery request, claiming exigent circumstances and potential evidence tampering. It took one phone call to a judge he'd worked with before. The judge, a former Marine, expedited everything. Shore watched the footage in his office, all 43 minutes of it. His paralegal stood behind him, watching over his shoulder. Neither spoke until it ended. The paralegal broke the silence first. "He's finished, the sheriff. He's completely finished." Shore nodded slowly. He wasn't just finished. This was career-ending, pension-threatening, potentially criminal charges against him territory. The footage showed everything. The lack of probable cause, the escalation, the false statements, the wrongful arrest. All of it captured in high definition with timestamps. But Shore also knew something else. Cases like this, even with perfect evidence, could take years. The system protected its own. Police unions, qualified immunity, the blue wall of silence. Briggs had 23 years on the job. He'd have support. He'd have lawyers. He'd fight this with every resource available. So Shore made another call. This one to a contact at the ACLU, then another to a civil rights attorney in Dallas who specialized in police misconduct, then a third to a journalist who'd covered similar cases. By midnight, 5 different organizations knew James's name and had copies of the footage. Back in the cell, James had no idea this machinery was already turning. He just sat there, breathing steadily, maintaining his composure. The man across from him had fallen asleep again.
The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the corridor, someone was yelling at a deputy about their medication. James closed his eyes and thought about his daughter. She was 7. Too young to understand why Daddy wasn't home tonight. His wife would shield her from this, come up with some explanation about work. But eventually, she'd be old enough to ask questions. Old enough to understand that her father, who served his country, who wore the uniform, who did everything right, still ended up in handcuffs on a Texas highway. That thought, more than anything else that had happened today, made James angry. Not the scared, reactive anger that gets people hurt, the cold, focused anger that sustains you through long campaigns, the kind that doesn't burn out. He opened his eyes and stared at the concrete wall. Briggs had made a mistake today. A catastrophic, career-ending, possibly life-altering mistake. And James was going to make absolutely certain everyone understood exactly what that mistake cost. Morning came with the sound of metal doors and shuffling footsteps. James hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Briggs's face. That smirk. That absolute certainty that he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. A deputy James hadn't seen before unlocked the cell. Breakfast trays were distributed on plastic traps. Powdered eggs, gray meat that might have been sausage, toast that bent like rubber. James ate mechanically, forcing down the calories. He'd learned in the military that you eat when food is available. You never know when the next meal is coming. 2 hours later, another deputy arrived. This one was older, probably close to retirement. His name tag read Sullivan. He told James he was being transferred to county for arraignment. The process was slow and deliberate. More paperwork, more waiting. James was handcuffed again, the metal biting into his wrists in exactly the same spots as yesterday. The bruises were already forming, dark purple rings around both wrists. Sullivan noticed but said nothing. The transport van was cramped and hot. 3 other people were already inside, separated by metal mesh. Nobody spoke. The drive took 40 minutes through flat Texas countryside. Strip malls gave way to fields, then back to developed areas as they approached the county seat. The courthouse was a massive concrete structure that looked like it had been built in the 70s and never updated. Beige walls, narrow windows, American flag hanging limp in the still morning air. James was processed again. Different facility, same routine. Fingerprints even though they already had them. Photograph even though they already took one. More questions even though he'd answered them all yesterday. The system grinding forward with bureaucratic indifference. He was placed in a holding cell with about 15 other people, all waiting for their turn before the judge. Some looked terrified. Others looked bored, like they'd been through this enough times that it no longer registered as remarkable. Shore arrived at the courthouse an hour before James's scheduled arraignment. He'd brought 2 associates and enough documentation to fill a briefcase. The dashcam footage was loaded on a tablet, ready to play. He'd also brought something else. A letter from James's commanding officer, written overnight and expedited through military channels. It detailed James's service record, his deployments, his commendations, his character. Shore knew it wouldn't matter for the legal arguments, but it would matter for optics. And in cases like this, optics mattered almost as much as the law. The arraignment was scheduled for 10:30. By 10:15, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread somehow, maybe through Shore's calls last night, maybe through social media, maybe just through the network of people who paid attention to these things. The gallery was filled with observers, some taking notes, others just watching. James recognized the type: activists, journalists, people who showed up when the system needed witnesses. Judge Catherine Reeves took the bench at exactly 10:30. She was in her late 50s, appointed rather than elected, with a reputation for running an efficient courtroom. She looked at the docket, then looked at the prosecutor, then looked at Shore. Her expression suggested she already knew this wasn't going to be a standard proceeding. The prosecutor stood first. His name was Glenn Porter, an assistant district attorney who'd been handling arraignments for 6 years. He began outlining the charges against James: evading arrest, resisting an officer, failure to comply with lawful orders. His voice was steady, professional, reading from prepared notes like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Shore stood when it was his turn. He didn't use notes. He spoke directly to Judge Reeves, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. He outlined the timeline of yesterday's stop, the lack of probable cause, the escalating demands, the threats. He mentioned the dashcam footage and offered to play it right there in open court. Judge Reeves held up a hand. She said she'd review the footage in chambers before making any determinations. She asked Porter if the state had seen the footage. Porter hesitated. That hesitation told everyone in the courtroom everything they needed to know. He hadn't seen it. The sheriff's department hadn't provided it to the prosecutor's office. They'd arrested James, filed charges, and moved forward without bothering to review their own evidence. Judge Reeves's expression changed. Not dramatically, just a slight tightening around her eyes. She called a recess and requested both attorneys in her chambers immediately. James was led back to the holding cell. He sat on the concrete bench and waited. Around him, other defendants whispered to each other, speculating about what was happening. One man, probably in his early 20s, asked James what he'd done. James didn't answer. 30 minutes passed. Then 45. James counted the tiles on the floor. 87 visible from where he sat. He counted them 3 times to make sure. When the deputies finally came to retrieve him, their demeanor had changed. Not friendly, but different. More careful. They brought him back to the courtroom where Judge Reeves was already seated. Shore was at the defense table, his expression neutral, but his posture relaxed. Porter stood at the prosecution table, looking like someone had just told him his house was on fire. Judge Reeves spoke directly to James. She informed him that all charges were being dismissed without prejudice. She said the court had reviewed the evidence and determined there was insufficient basis to proceed. She also said something else. She was referring the matter to the state attorney general's office for review of potential civil rights violations. The words hung in the air like smoke. James felt Shore's hand on his shoulder, a brief squeeze of reassurance. The judge continued. She stated for the record that the court found serious concerns about the conduct of the arresting officer. She noted that the dashcam footage raised questions about training, supervision, and departmental policies. She said these concerns extended beyond this single incident and warranted comprehensive investigation. Every word was being transcribed by the court reporter. Every word would become part of the permanent record. Every word was another nail in Briggs' professional coffin. Porter tried to salvage something. He stood and requested the dismissal be with prejudice, meaning the charges could never be refiled. Judge Reeves denied the request. She said the state needed to determine whether the evidence supported different charges against different defendants. The implication was clear. Maybe James shouldn't be charged. Maybe someone else should be. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Reeves gavelled for order, then dismissed the proceeding. James walked out of the courthouse 20 minutes later, a free man for the first time in 18 hours. The sunlight felt aggressive after the fluorescent gloom of cells and courtrooms. Shore stood beside him on the courthouse steps, fielding questions from reporters who'd gathered outside. James said nothing. He just stood there, blinking in the bright Texas sun, trying to process that this part was over. But he knew it wasn't really over. This was just the beginning. Shore drove James back to the impound lot where his truck had been towed. The fees were astronomical. $217 for the tow, $90 per day for storage, administrative fees, processing fees, fees for fees. James paid with a credit card, each swipe feeling like another small injustice. His truck started on the first try. He sat in the driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at nothing in particular. Shore tapped on the window. James rolled it down. "We're filing the lawsuit tomorrow. Federal court. Civil rights violations, unlawful arrest, false imprisonment, emotional distress. We're also filing a formal complaint with the State Police Oversight Board and requesting a Department of Justice investigation into the department's practices." Shore's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. "This is going to get ugly. They're going to fight. They're going to try to destroy your credibility. They're going to dig into every aspect of your life looking for ammunition. You need to be ready for that." James nodded slowly. He understood. He'd seen how institutions protected themselves, how they circled the wagons and attacked anyone who threatened their authority, how they turned victims into villains through carefully crafted narratives and selective evidence. But he also knew something Briggs and the sheriff's department didn't. He'd been trained to withstand pressure. He'd operated in environments where mistakes meant death. He'd maintained composure under circumstances that would break most people. A smear campaign from a rural Texas sheriff's department wasn't going to rattle him. Shore seemed to read his thoughts. He nodded once, a gesture of respect between people who understood what real combat looked like. Then he walked back to his own car. James drove home slowly, obeying every traffic law with meticulous precision. Every stop sign was a complete stop. Every turn signal activated exactly when required. Every speed limit followed to the letter. He felt eyes on him the whole way. Probably paranoia. Probably just residual hypervigilance from yesterday. But maybe not. Maybe every cop in the county now knew his face, his truck, his license plate. Maybe he was marked. The thought didn't scare him. It made him angry again. That cold, focused anger that didn't fade. The lawsuit was filed on a Thursday morning in federal court. Shore didn't hold a press conference, but he didn't need to. The complaint was public record, and by noon, 3 news outlets had published stories with headlines that made the sheriff's department sound exactly as corrupt as they were. The document was 93 pages of methodical legal destruction. It named Officer Briggs, Sheriff Coleman, the department itself, and the county as defendants. It detailed every moment of the traffic stop, the illegal search, the fabricated arrest, the coordinated false testimony. It included timestamps from the dashcam footage that hadn't been released publicly yet. It quoted the audio of Briggs discussing how to justify the arrest after the fact. It presented evidence of a pattern. Turns out James wasn't the first person Briggs had targeted. Shore's investigators had found 7 other cases in the past 4 years where Briggs made arrests that were later dismissed or reduced to nothing. All 7 involved Black or Hispanic drivers. All 7 involved searches that found nothing illegal. All 7 resulted in people spending hours or days in custody before being released without charges or with charges that vanished mysteriously. The lawsuit demanded compensatory damages, punitive damages, legal fees, and a federal consent decree forcing the department to reform its practices under court supervision. The number attached to the demand was substantial: $3.7 million. The county's insurance carrier received the complaints and immediately contacted their lawyers. By Friday afternoon, those lawyers were in emergency meetings trying to assess their exposure. Their conclusion was grim. The dashcam footage alone made this case almost impossible to defend. The audio of Briggs and the other officer discussing how to justify the arrest was catastrophic. The pattern evidence suggested institutional problems that went beyond one bad cop. If this went to trial, a jury would eviscerate them. Monday morning, the sheriff's department held a press conference. Sheriff Coleman stood at a podium looking like a man who'd aged 10 years over the weekend. He announced that Officer Briggs had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. He said the department took allegations of misconduct seriously and was committed to transparency and accountability. He said he couldn't comment on pending litigation, but assured the public that his department operated with integrity. The reporters didn't buy it. They asked pointed questions about the pattern of dismissed cases. They asked why Briggs was still employed if the evidence was so damning. They asked if the sheriff planned to resign. Coleman deflected, repeated his prepared statements, and left without answering most of the questions. The internal investigation was a joke. Everyone involved knew it. Internal investigations almost always were. The investigator assigned was a sergeant who'd worked alongside Briggs for 6 years. The interviews were cursory. The conclusions were predetermined. 3 weeks later, the department announced that while Officer Briggs had made errors in judgment, there was insufficient evidence of intentional wrongdoing. He would receive additional training and return to duty with restrictions on conducting traffic stops without backup. Shore received the report and laughed out loud when he read it. He filed a supplemental complaint in federal court, arguing that the sham investigation proved the department's institutional corruption. He requested the judge expedite discovery so they could depose Briggs, Coleman, and every officer involved before the department could coordinate their stories further. The judge, a Carter appointee with a reputation for not tolerating law enforcement misconduct, granted the request. Depositions were scheduled for 6 weeks out. During those 6 weeks, James tried to resume normal life. He went back to work at the construction company, but the arrest had changed things. His supervisor was supportive, but some coworkers treated him differently, like he was fragile or dangerous, or both. One guy actually asked if James was going to sue them too. The paranoia about being targeted by police never fully disappeared. Every time James drove anywhere, he watched his mirrors obsessively. Every patrol car he saw sent his heart rate spiking. He started taking different routes to avoid certain roads. He installed a second dash cam facing backward. The psychological toll was heavier than he'd expected. He found himself having trouble sleeping. When he did sleep, he dreamed about being handcuffed, about metal bars, about officers laughing while planting evidence. He started researching therapists who specialized in trauma but didn't actually call any of them. Admitting he needed help felt like giving Briggs another victory. Then, the deposition started. Shore brought in an associate to help with the questioning. They spent 12 hours over 3 days deposing Briggs, and the officer fell apart spectacularly. Under oath, confronted with his own recorded words, and caught in multiple contradictions, Briggs couldn't maintain his story. He claimed he couldn't remember specific details. He blamed his training. He suggested James must have seemed suspicious for reasons he couldn't articulate. He denied racial bias while simultaneously describing his approach to traffic stops in ways that revealed obvious bias. Shore was relentless. He walked Briggs through every second of the encounter, forcing him to explain each decision. Why this car? Why this justification? Why search without consent? Why arrest for a non-existent warrant? The officer's answers became increasingly incoherent. At one point, Briggs actually said he felt threatened by James's military bearing. A decorated veteran sitting calmly in his truck was threatening because he sat up straight. The absurdity was documented in the deposition transcript for posterity. Sheriff Coleman's deposition was worse for the defense. He admitted under questioning that he'd received complaints about Briggs before. He acknowledged that the pattern of dismissed cases should have triggered review. He confirmed that departmental policy required supervisory approval for searches without consent, which Briggs had never obtained. He tried to defend his decision to support Briggs initially, but his explanation sounded hollow even to him. Shore asked one question that Coleman couldn't answer satisfactorily. If you believed Officer Briggs acted appropriately, why did you personally call the prosecutor to suggest dropping charges? Coleman stammered something about wanting to avoid unnecessary legal expenses. Shore let the answer hang there, speaking volumes through silence. The prosecutor who dropped the charges was deposed next. She was professional and careful, but her testimony was devastating for the defense. She confirmed that after reviewing the dashcam footage, she'd determined there was no probable cause for the arrest. She stated that she'd found the officer's justifications inconsistent with the evidence. She acknowledged that she'd recommended the county settle any potential civil suit quickly because their position was indefensible. 2 weeks after the depositions concluded, the county's lawyers requested a settlement conference. Shore agreed immediately. He knew what this meant. They were ready to pay. The settlement conference took place in a windowless room at the federal courthouse. James sat beside Shore at one table. Across from them sat 3 lawyers representing the county, the department, and the insurance carrier. A magistrate judge facilitated. The county opened with an offer of $200,000 in exchange for releasing all claims and signing a non-disclosure agreement. Shore rejected it without consulting James. The number was insulting, and the NDA was a non-starter. They went back and forth for 6 hours. The county gradually increased their offer. $300,000, $450,000, $600,000. Each time, Shore countered higher, and each time he refused any agreement that included a confidentiality clause. James needed to be able to tell his story. The public needed to know what happened. Sunlight was the only disinfectant that mattered. By late afternoon, exhaustion was setting in. The magistrate called a break and spoke privately with each side. When they reconvened, the county put their final offer on the table. $1.2 million. No NDA. Briggs would be terminated. The department would implement mandatory bias training and reform its search and arrest policies under independent oversight. James would receive a written apology from Sheriff Coleman. Shore looked at James. The decision was his.
James thought about the 18 hours in custody, the humiliation, the fear, the anger that still hadn't fully dissipated. He thought about the 7 other people Briggs had done this to. He thought about how many more there might be that they hadn't found. 1.2 million wouldn't undo what happened. Money never could. But it would send a message. It would make other departments think twice. It would cost the people who'd violated his rights something real. James nodded once. Shore accepted the offer. The settlement was finalized 3 weeks later. James received a check that changed his financial situation permanently. He paid off his truck, his mother's house, every debt he'd accumulated. He put the rest in investments Shore's office recommended. Briggs was fired 2 days after the settlement was signed. No ceremony, no announcement, just a termination letter and an escort out of the building. He tried to appeal through his union, but even they couldn't defend what the depositions had revealed. Sheriff Coleman announced his retirement 4 months later, citing health reasons. Everyone knew the real reason. The Department of Justice opened a pattern and practice investigation into the Sheriff's Department based on the evidence from James's case. That investigation was still ongoing, but preliminary findings suggested systemic problems that would require years of federal oversight to correct. James never went back to construction. He used part of the settlement money to enroll in college, studying criminal justice. His plan was to understand the system from the inside, then work to change it. Maybe become a lawyer himself eventually. Maybe just an advocate. He hadn't decided yet. What he had decided was that what happened to him couldn't just be about money and revenge. It had to mean something larger. It had to prevent the next person from experiencing what he'd experienced. The anger had transformed into purpose. On a warm evening 6 months after the settlement, James drove past the spot where Briggs had pulled him over. He didn't slow down or stop. He just drove past, noting it without emotion, and continued toward wherever he was headed next. That stretch of highway looks the same as it did the day Briggs pulled him over. The asphalt still bakes under the Texas sun. Cars still roll past at 70 miles per hour, drivers never knowing what happened on this particular patch of road. Nothing marks the spot. No memorial, no sign. Just another piece of American highway where someone's life got turned inside out because a man with a badge decided that authority trumped humanity. James thinks about that sometimes when he's sitting in his criminal justice classes. Thinks about how many other spots like that exist across the country. How many other people got handcuffed for nothing? How many didn't have dash cams or lawyers or the resources to fight back? The system worked for him, eventually, but only because he could force it to work. That realization sits heavy. Briggs is working security at a shopping mall now, last anyone heard. Coleman plays golf and collects his pension. The department operates under federal oversight, which means more paperwork and training sessions that officers sit through while checking their phones. Change happens slowly when it happens at all. But that $1.2 million sent a message that reverberated beyond Brazos County. It showed up in training materials. It got cited in other civil rights cases. It became the example of what happens when the system actually holds people accountable for abusing their power. Not justice exactly. More like a warning that sometimes, occasionally, the cost of racism and corruption becomes too high to ignore. James still checks his mirrors obsessively when he drives. Still feels his pulse spike when he sees patrol cars. The settlement paid for therapy, which helps, but some things don't heal completely. They just become part of who you are, scars you carry forward. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you,
right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, a lot of you have told me you're waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and just lying there. Can't shut your mind off. And the next day, you're dragging through everything. I came across a simple 21-day sleep guide that's helped thousands of people fix exactly that. No pills, no apps, no gadgets. Just a step-by-step plan that actually works. It's only $15. I put the link in the description if you want to check it out. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.
You expect me to believe this is your car? People don't just cruise through this neighborhood like this by accident.
I have given you my license and registration. Both are valid.
I've seen this before. Someone like you driving something like this? I decide what makes sense out here.
At 9:36 p.m. on a Thursday night, a Santa Barbara County Sheriff's deputy activated his lights on Highway 101, just south of Santa Barbara, and pulled over a black Mercedes-Benz S-Class that had been driving 5 miles under the speed limit with no traffic violations of any kind. The driver was a black woman in her late 50s, wearing a tailored charcoal blazer with a Federal Judicial Conference lanyard still hanging from her neck. She was the Honorable Denise Livingston, a sitting United States Federal District Judge with 22 years on the bench, appointed by a president and confirmed by the United States Senate. The deputy who pulled her over, Wade Prescott, didn't know any of that. He saw a black woman driving an expensive car through a wealthy zip code at night, and in his mind, that was enough. He had already decided before he even stepped out of his cruiser that she didn't belong. His dash cam was recording, his body cam was rolling, and so was hers, a personal dash cam she had installed on her windshield 3 years earlier after a traffic stop in Ventura County where the officer's body cam conveniently malfunctioned and her complaint went nowhere. She had promised herself that would never happen again. What unfolded over the next 23 minutes on the shoulder of that highway would be captured from 3 angles, broadcast to millions, and trigger the largest civil rights lawsuit in Santa Barbara County history. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe because this story will shake you. Deputy Wade Prescott was 43 years old and had spent 18 years with the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department. In that time, 6 formal complaints of racial profiling had been filed against him. Every single one had been dismissed internally. Black and Latino residents of the county knew his name. They knew his cruiser. They knew his habit of running plates in wealthy neighborhoods, scanning for what he once described to a fellow deputy as people who don't match. 2 prior lawsuits had been filed against him by drivers who said they were stopped, searched, and humiliated for no reason other than the color of their skin. Both cases were settled quietly by the county for undisclosed amounts. No admission of wrongdoing, no disciplinary action, no retraining. His supervisors described him in performance reviews as aggressive but effective. His sergeant, Roy Gatlin, had personally signed off on dismissing 4 of the 6 complaints, labeling each one unsubstantiated, despite body cam footage that several internal reviewers flagged as concerning. Prescott had learned over 18 years that the system would protect him, that complaints disappeared, that settlements were buried, that no one with the power to stop him ever would. He patrolled the wealthiest corridors of the county with an unspoken mandate he had invented for himself, keeping certain people out of certain zip codes. And on this Thursday night, cruising slowly behind a black Mercedes on the 101, he had already chosen his next target. The Honorable Denise Livingston was 58 years old and had spent her entire life earning what no one could give her. She was born in Watts, Los Angeles, in a 2-bedroom apartment where the windows didn't lock and the heat only worked half the year. Her mother, Ruth Livingston, worked 2 jobs, days at a garment factory and nights cleaning office buildings in downtown LA to keep Denise fed, clothed, and in school. There was no father in the picture, no safety net, no inheritance, no connections. What there was a girl who read everything she could get her hands on and a mother who told her every single morning that her mind was the one thing nobody could take from her. Denise earned a full scholarship to Stanford, then a full ride to Yale Law School, where she graduated in the top 5 of her class. She clerked for a Ninth Circuit judge, spent a decade as a federal prosecutor specializing in civil rights cases, and was appointed to the federal bench, where she had served with distinction for 22 years. She had presided over police misconduct trials, corruption cases, and civil rights violations at the highest level. Legal scholars described her as brilliant. Attorneys who appeared before her called her unshakable. Her record was spotless, her reputation earned through decades of discipline and sacrifice. The Mercedes she drove was not a gift. It was not inherited. She bought it herself after 30 years of work because she had earned it. And the dash cam mounted on her windshield was there because 3 years earlier, a Ventura County officer had pulled her over. His body cam had mysteriously malfunctioned, and her complaint had gone nowhere. She swore after that night she would never again be without her own recording. That decision was about to matter more than she ever imagined. Prescott followed Livingston's Mercedes for 1.6 miles before he activated his lights. His dashcam recorded the entire pursuit. The Mercedes maintained a consistent speed, stayed within its lane, signaled every merge, and committed no traffic violation of any kind. There was no legal reason for the stop. Livingston saw the flashing lights in her mirror and did exactly what any careful, experienced person would do. She signaled, slowed gradually, and pulled into a well-lit gas station rather than stopping on the dark highway shoulder. It was a deliberate choice, a safe choice, the kind of decision someone makes when they've been through this before and know that darkness and isolation make everything worse. Prescott stepped out of his cruiser and approached the driver's side window. His body cam recorded his first words. "License and registration. Where are you headed tonight?" Livingston already had both documents in her hand. She passed them through the window without hesitation. "Here you are, Deputy. May I ask why I was stopped?" Prescott didn't answer. He took the license and studied it, eyes moving from the photo to her face, from the face to the car, from the car back to the license. The pause was long enough for Livingston to feel its weight. "This your vehicle?" "Yes, it is." "You sure about that?" Livingston's personal dashcam captured everything from inside the cabin. Her calm, steady voice. Her hands resting on the steering wheel exactly where they should be. And the shift in Prescott's tone. The way his questions stopped being procedural and became something else entirely. The tone was set, and both cameras were rolling. Prescott walked back to his cruiser with Livingston's license and registration in his hand. He ran her plates. He ran her license. Everything came back clean. No warrants, no violations. No flags of any kind. The registration was current, the insurance was valid. The vehicle was registered to Denise Livingston at a residential address in Santa Barbara County. The name on the registration matched. The name on the license matched the face of the woman sitting calmly behind the wheel. There was nothing. No probable cause, no reasonable suspicion, no legal justification to continue the stop for even one more second. Any officer following the law would have walked her documents back to her window, handed them over, and wished her a good night. Prescott picked up his radio instead. He told dispatch he had a suspicious vehicle, possible stolen, driver not matching registration. His body cam recorded every word. The registration matched, the license matched, the face matched. He fabricated the suspicion because the truth gave him nothing to work with. A second unit arrived within minutes. Deputy Karen Nolan, 29 years old, 2 years on the job. She parked behind Prescott's cruiser and walked to his window for a briefing. Whatever he told her was enough. She didn't question it. She didn't verify it. She followed his lead without hesitation, the way she always did. The way officers with no confidence and no backbone always do when paired with someone louder and more certain. Prescott returned to Livingston's window. "Step out of the vehicle." Livingston's voice remained steady. "Deputy, I've given you my license and registration. Everything is valid. Why am I being asked to step out?" Prescott's tone dropped. "Step out of the vehicle now, or you will be removed." Both cameras recorded the threat. Livingston's dash cam captured her face, calm but alert, the expression of a woman who understood exactly what was happening and knew it was about to get worse. Livingston opened the door slowly and stepped out with her hands visible at her sides. She was wearing a tailored charcoal blazer, pressed trousers, and heels. A Federal Judicial Conference lanyard was still around her neck. Everything about her appearance said she was returning from a professional event. Nothing about her said threat. Nothing about her said suspicious. Nothing about her said anything other than a woman driving home after a long day of work. Prescott pointed at the hood of the Mercedes. Hands on the vehicle. Livingston placed her palms flat on the hood. The metal was still warm from the engine. She could feel the grit of highway dust under her fingers. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying the precision of someone who had spent 22 years choosing her words inside a federal courtroom. Deputy, I want you to know that I am a United States Federal District Judge. I am returning from a judicial conference in Los Angeles. My credentials are in my bag on the passenger seat. You are making a serious error. Prescott's body cam captured his response without flinch or hesitation. I don't care if you're the Queen of England. People lie about who they are all the time. Someone like you driving this car in this neighborhood? I've seen it before. Someone like me. Livingston repeated the words slowly, making sure every microphone within range picked them up. Prescott didn't answer. He turned to Nolan and told her to search the vehicle. Livingston's voice cut through the night air. I do not consent to a search. There is no probable cause. You have no warrant. I am invoking my rights clearly and for the record. Prescott didn't look at her. He nodded at Nolan. Nolan opened the passenger door of the Mercedes and began searching through the belongings of a sitting federal judge, without consent, without cause, and without any legal authority to do so. Livingston stood motionless on the shoulder of Highway 101, palms on the hood, jaw tight, watching a deputy rifle through her judicial case files while the cameras recorded everything. Nolan searched the Mercedes methodically, opening every compartment, checking under seats, going through the center console, the glove box, the trunk. She found nothing illegal. No drugs, no weapons, no contraband, no evidence of any crime whatsoever. What she did find should have ended the encounter immediately. On the passenger seat sat a leather briefcase stamped with the gold seal of the United States District Court. Inside were active case files, judicial correspondence, and a federal judicial ID badge with a photo of the woman standing outside on the hood of the car. In the back seat hung a garment bag. Nolan unzipped it and found a judge's robe, pressed and ready for court. Beside the briefcase was a printed itinerary for the California Federal Judicial Conference, listing the Honorable Denise Livingston as a presiding panelist. Nolan held up the judicial ID badge and showed it to Prescott. His body cam captured the moment clearly. He glanced at the badge, paused for exactly 2 seconds, then spoke. Anyone can buy those online. That doesn't prove anything. He turned back to Livingston. I'm detaining you until we verify your identity. Livingston did not move. Her voice stayed level. You have my driver's license, my vehicle registration, my federal judicial ID, and my conference itinerary. Everything matches. Every document confirms exactly who I am. You have no legal basis for detention. Prescott reached for his cuffs. He pulled Livingston's wrists behind her back and locked the handcuffs into place. The metallic click was sharp enough to be picked up by his body cam, her dash cam, and the phone camera of a passing driver who had slowed to watch. Another car pulled to the shoulder across the street. A second phone came out. And there, on the side of Highway 101, a United States Federal District Judge stood in handcuffs under the flashing lights of a sheriff's cruiser, while 2 deputies rifled through her judicial case files on the hood of her own car. 3 civilians had now stopped or slowed along the shoulder. 2 of them were recording. The first to step out of his vehicle was Franklin DeVoe, 67, a retired attorney who had spent 35 years practicing constitutional law before hanging up his briefcase. He walked toward the scene with the calm authority of a man who knew exactly what he was looking at. Officer, that woman just told you she's a federal judge. I can see the robe in the back seat of the vehicle. What exactly are you doing? Prescott's body cam caught his response. Sir, step back or I will arrest you for obstruction. DeVoe didn't flinch. He stepped back to the legal distance and kept his phone raised, lens pointed directly at the encounter, recording every second with the steady hand of someone who understood
that footage was evidence. A second witness, Sophia Ruiz, 34, had pulled her car to the opposite shoulder. She opened her social media app and began live streaming the encounter. Within minutes, the stream had over 100 viewers. Within 20, it would be in the thousands. Comments were already flooding in. Meanwhile, Livingston stood cuffed beside her Mercedes, the red and blue lights of the cruiser reflecting off her blazer. She asked Prescott if she could make a phone call. Denied. She asked for his full name and badge number. He gave his name slowly, reluctantly, as if each syllable cost him something. She asked for the name of his supervisor. Refused. Livingston straightened her posture, looked directly ahead, and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of every courtroom she had ever commanded. Deputy Prescott, I am telling you for the record that I am a sitting United States federal district judge, that you have no probable cause for this stop, this search, or this detention, that I have been unlawfully restrained, and that this interaction is being recorded by your body camera, my personal dash cam, and multiple civilian witnesses. Every word landed like a ruling from the bench. Prescott said nothing, but his body cam caught the shift in his breathing and the first visible crack in his confidence. Sergeant Roy Gatlin arrived on scene 11 minutes after Nolan keyed her radio and said quietly, almost under her breath, that the situation might be more complicated than it looks. Gatlin stepped out of his cruiser and walked past the civilian witnesses, past the phone still recording, past Sophia Ruiz's live stream that now had over 2,000 viewers. He approached the Mercedes first. He looked at the judicial ID badge sitting on the hood. He picked up the leather briefcase and saw the gold seal of the United States District Court stamped into the leather. He opened the garment bag and saw the robe. He read the conference itinerary, and his face changed. Not slowly, not subtly. It changed the way a man's face changes when he realizes that the ground beneath him has just opened up. He pulled Prescott aside, stepping 10 feet from Livingston. But both body cams were still rolling, and Livingston's dash cam, still mounted on the windshield of the Mercedes, captured the conversation through the open window. Wade, she's got a federal judicial ID, a robe, case files with court seals on them. Could be fake, Prescott said. It's not fake, Wade. This is real. Uncuff her, now. She was being difficult. She wouldn't answer my questions. She answered every question. I listened to your cam feed on the way here. You had nothing from the start. Uncuff her right now. Prescott walked back to Livingston and removed the handcuffs. He did it roughly, twisting the metal against her skin as he pulled them free. The red marks they left behind would be photographed within hours. Gatlin approached Livingston with his hands open. Ma'am, I apologize for... Livingston's voice stopped him cold. Sergeant, I don't want a roadside apology. I want your name, your badge number, your supervisor's name, and I want a copy of every second of body cam and dash cam footage recorded tonight by every officer on this scene. This is not over. Gatlin's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He knew exactly what a federal judge with evidence and resolve could do. And for the first time that night, someone on that shoulder understood just how badly this was going to end. Livingston got back into her Mercedes, placed her hands on the steering wheel, and sat still for a full minute before pulling onto the highway. She drove the remaining 22 miles home without turning on the radio. She did not cry. She did not shake. She did not call anyone from the car. She had spent 22 years on the federal bench watching people fall apart in the aftermath of injustice. She had learned that emotion without documentation was just pain. Documentation without precision was just noise, and she intended to be neither. She walked into her home, set her briefcase on the kitchen table, and sat down with a legal pad and a pen. For the next 90 minutes, she wrote a detailed account of every word spoken, every action taken, every moment from the first flash of lights in her mirror to the sound of the handcuffs clicking, to the red marks they left behind. The account was time-stamped, precise, and structured with the discipline of a mind trained by decades of legal work.
When she finished writing, she photographed the marks on both wrists from multiple angles. She removed the dash cam from her windshield and downloaded the footage to 2 separate encrypted drives. One went into her home safe. The other she placed in her briefcase. The next morning, she made 3 phone calls. The first was to the chief judge of her district. The second was to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. The third was to Constance Favreau, a civil rights litigator with a reputation in California legal circles that made defense attorneys lose sleep. By noon, formal complaints had been filed with the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office, the California Department of Justice, the FBI's Civil Rights Division, and the United States Department of Justice Office for Civil Rights. This was not a local grievance submitted through a web form and left to gather dust in an internal affairs drawer. This was a sitting federal judge activating every institutional lever available to her with surgical precision. And when the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department received the complaint and saw the name attached to it, the room went quiet. The FBI opened a formal civil rights investigation within 48 hours of receiving Judge Livingston's complaint. The DOJ Civil Rights Division assigned a dedicated team of investigators the same day. The Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department launched its own internal affairs review, but the FBI made the hierarchy clear from the first phone call. This was now a federal matter. County cooperation was expected. County interference would not be tolerated. Investigators pulled Deputy Wade Prescott's full personnel record. What they found was not a single bad night. It was a pattern. 6 formal complaints of racial profiling over 18 years. 2 prior civil lawsuits settled quietly by the county with sealed amounts and no admission of fault. And then the Bodycam data. Investigators requested footage from every traffic stop Prescott had conducted in wealthy neighborhoods over the previous 2 years. There were 87 stops total. 71 of them involved Black or Latino drivers. Statistical analysis conducted by a federal forensic consultant confirmed that Prescott stopped Black drivers at 11 times the rate of white drivers on the same corridors during the same hours. The numbers were not ambiguous. They were damning. Then investigators turned to Sergeant Roy Gatlin. His record showed that he had personally reviewed and dismissed 4 of the 6 complaints filed against Prescott, each time labeling them unsubstantiated, despite body cam footage that internal reviewers had flagged as concerning. But the most damaging discovery came from Gatlin's email. In a message sent to a department supervisor 14 months before the Livingston stop, Gatlin had written about Prescott plainly. He's aggressive, but he keeps the right people paying attention. He's an asset. The right people. That phrase would be circled, highlighted, and read aloud in depositions, in courtrooms, and eventually on national television. It became the 5 words that proved the department didn't just fail to stop Prescott. It valued what he was doing. Sophia Ruiz's live stream from the shoulder of Highway 101 had reached 4 million views within a week. The footage was shaky, shot from across the road in the dark, but what it captured was unmistakable. A black woman in a blazer, standing in handcuffs beside a Mercedes-Benz, while 2 deputies searched her car under flashing lights. When news outlets filed public records requests and obtained Prescott's body cam footage, the story detonated. Every major network ran the video. Cable news played it on loop. The moment Prescott said, "Someone like you driving this car in this neighborhood," was isolated, replayed, and analyzed frame by legal experts who called it one of the most blatant examples of racial profiling ever captured on an officer's own equipment. But it was one image that cut deeper than any clip. A single still frame pulled from a bystander's phone showing Livingston in handcuffs, her blazer creased from being pressed against the hood, and behind her, through the rear window of the Mercedes, the dark fabric of a federal judge's robe hanging in a garment bag. That image was shared millions of times in 72 hours. It was printed on protest signs. It appeared on the front page of newspapers across the country. It became the photograph that defined the case. The Santa Barbara County Sheriff held a press conference. He stood behind a podium and called the incident isolated. He said the department takes all complaints seriously and that an internal review was underway. He took no questions. That same afternoon, Constance Favreau held her own press conference on the steps of the federal courthouse. She stood beside a podium with no notes and announced a $35 million federal civil rights lawsuit filed against Deputy Wade Prescott, Sergeant Roy Gatlin, and the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department. The suit cited unlawful detention, racial profiling, excessive force, fabrication of probable cause, false statements to dispatch, conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law, and systemic failure to discipline or supervise officers with documented histories of racial bias. Favreau paused, looked directly into the cameras, and said this was not an isolated incident. This was a system that worked exactly the way it was designed to, and now that system would answer for it. The lawsuit moved through federal court, the very system Judge Livingston had served for 22 years. She was immediately and voluntarily recused from any involvement. The case was assigned to a colleague in another district, but the institution she had dedicated her career to would now be the one that examined, under oath, what had been done to her on the shoulder of a highway because of the color of her skin. Discovery was devastating. Prescott's full personnel file was opened for the first time outside the walls of the Sheriff's Department, and what it revealed was not a handful of mistakes by an otherwise competent officer. It was a career built on targeting people who looked a certain way in neighborhoods he believed they didn't belong in. Gatlin's emails laid bare the institutional architecture that allowed it. Memo after memo showed complaints received, flagged, and buried. But it was the depositions that broke the case open. 8 other Black and Latino drivers who had been stopped by Prescott in the same wealthy corridors over the previous 4 years came forward. Their accounts were almost identical. Expensive cars, quiet neighborhoods, no traffic violation, fabricated suspicion, humiliation. A Black cardiologist described being ordered out of his vehicle during a Sunday afternoon drive home from the hospital and forced to lie face down on hot asphalt in a $4,000 suit, while Prescott searched his car and found nothing. A Latina business owner described being handcuffed on the sidewalk in front of her 14-year-old daughter after picking her up from a private school in a neighborhood Prescott apparently decided she had no reason to be in. None of them had committed a crime. None of them had been charged with anything. Every single one of them had filed a complaint. And every single complaint had been reviewed and dismissed by Sergeant Roy Gatlin. The pattern was no longer suggestive. It was undeniable. Federal prosecutors opened a parallel criminal investigation into whether Prescott and Gatlin had engaged in a conspiracy to deprive citizens of their civil rights under color of law. The case had crossed the line from misconduct into something far more serious. The consequences came down like a chain of controlled demolitions, one after another, each one louder than the last. Deputy Wade Prescott was terminated from the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department for gross misconduct, racial profiling, unlawful detention, fabrication of probable cause, false statements to dispatch, and conduct unbecoming of a law enforcement officer. His law enforcement certification was permanently revoked by the state of California. He would never wear a badge again in any jurisdiction in the state. Then came the federal indictment. Prescott was criminally charged with deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242 and conspiracy to deprive civil rights under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 241. The charges carried a combined maximum sentence of 10 years in federal prison. Sergeant Roy Gatlin was fired the same week for systematic failure to investigate complaints, complicity in a pattern of racial profiling, and falsifying internal affairs findings. He was indicted as a co-conspirator in the federal case. The man who had spent years signing off on Prescott's behavior now faced the same system he had helped Prescott evade. Deputy Kara Nolan was placed on immediate suspension, then terminated for failure to intervene during an unlawful detention and for conducting an illegal search of a vehicle without consent, without probable cause, and without a warrant. She had followed Prescott's lead without question. That silence carried its own price. 3 additional supervisors within the department were disciplined. One was demoted 2 ranks. One was forced into early retirement. A third was suspended without pay pending further review. The $35 million federal lawsuit filed by Constance Favreau on behalf of Judge Livingston settled before trial. The exact amount was not disclosed, but legal observers familiar with the negotiations reported it was the largest civil rights settlement in Santa Barbara County history. But the money was not the sharpest edge of the outcome. The settlement included sweeping mandatory reforms imposed on the department. An independent civilian oversight board with full investigative authority. Mandatory bias training with annual certification requirements for every officer. Automatic external review of any complaint involving racial profiling. Real-time bodycam auditing by a third-party monitor. And a public database tracking every traffic stop conducted by the department, categorized by race, location, time, and outcome, updated quarterly and accessible to anyone. The department that had protected Wade Prescott for 18 years would now operate under a microscope it could not remove. Judge Denise Livingston returned to the bench. She did not give interviews. She did not write op-eds. She did not appear on panels or accept invitations to speak about what happened to her on the shoulder of Highway 101.
She let the case speak for itself the way she had always believed the law should speak, through evidence, through process, through outcomes that could be measured and held up to the light. But through her attorney, Constance Favreau, she released a single written statement. It was 4 sentences long. I was not stopped because of what I did. I was stopped because of what I look like. I had the credentials, the resources, and the legal knowledge to fight back. Most people who experience what I experienced do not. This case is for them. A portion of the settlement was directed into a new legal defense initiative, providing free representation to victims of racial profiling across California. The fund was structured to outlast any single case, designed to serve the people Livingston knew were out there. People who had stood on the side of a road in handcuffs, with no cameras rolling and no judge's robe in the back seat to prove they mattered. Prescott's federal criminal trial began 4 months later. His defense attorney argued that Prescott had been following department training and acting on instinct developed over 18 years of service. The prosecution responded with his body cam footage, Livingston's dash cam footage, civilian recordings from 3 witnesses, the statistical analysis showing he stopped black drivers at 11 times the rate of white drivers, Gatlin's emails, and testimony from 9 other victims who described encounters so similar they could have been reading from the same script. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts. Prescott was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Gatlin, who had enabled him for years and buried every warning sign the system produced, received 3 years. Weeks later, on the stretch of Highway 101 just south of Santa Barbara where it all happened, a billboard appeared. No one claimed credit for it. No organization put its name on it. It simply read, "Justice doesn't ask what you look like. Neither should the law." Back in her courtroom, Judge Denise Livingston presided over her next case. She adjusted her robe, reviewed her notes, and brought the room to order. The gavel fell. The system continued, imperfect, slow, and far from equal. But on this day, corrected. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, a lot of you have told me you're waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and just lying there. Can't shut your mind off. And the next day, you're dragging through everything. I came across a simple 21-day sleep guide that's helped thousands of people fix exactly that. No pills, no apps, no gadgets. Just a step-by-step plan that actually works. It's only $15. I put the link in the description if you want to check it out. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.